Here we go. An accidental overdose of what drug drove Dr. McCoy into a paranoid state?
Hmm. This is definitely City on the Edge of Forever.
Yeah, correct. An accidental overdose of what drug drove Dr. McCoy into a paranoid state? You got four options. Um, Massiform D, Silodin, Cordrazine, or Stocaline. I get to talk and Greg can't interrupt me. Here's why you're wrong, Greg.
Find your lane.
I agree with Greg 100% on that.
Welcome to A Piece of the Action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
I'm Greg.
And today we're going to continue talking about some of the most voted on games on BoardGameGeek.com. And the one that we're going to be looking at today is Seven Wonders. Came out in 2010 by designer Antoine Bauza. And I'm very interested to hear about this game because of all the ones we've covered thus far. This is definitely the one that I know the least about. I don't have any idea. I don't believe I've ever played it. Don't have any idea what it's about, how it goes. So why don't we start out maybe with Eric? You give us a sort of a summary of what Seven Wonders is all about.
So Seven Wonders is, thematically, it is a civilization building game. It's all card driven. So every player is representative of some kind of civilization. And it's really kind of focused around a wonder, one of the actual wonders of the ancient world. And not that is supposed to be a complete representation of your civilization, but it represents like something that your civilization can eventually achieve. And the game kind of revolves around that wonder, trying to build it if you can. But that's not the interesting thing of the game is that can take second place. Building the wonder doesn't necessarily mean you win the game. It's a bit of a point salad as to how you win the game, and the way you play is effectively you just the cards that you have in your hand, you see if you can. Actually, it's very, very simple. Actually, you just see if you can purchase them with the. Let's see, you get 7 cards in your hand, right, Greg?
Mm-hmm. Everything's 7 in this game.
Everything's 7s in the game. It's very easy to remember. You draw 7 cards, and then on your turn, you play one of them, and some of them have costs and some of them don't. You play them. There's different categories of cards. Generally, what they do is they produce resources, and then in the first age, you will give your hand to the player to your left, and that goes around. So everybody goes through all 7 cards, playing what they can, and then you draw a new deck. You deal a new deck out. That's age 2, and you do the same thing, except the draft goes to the right, and you play all the cards, and then same thing for age 3. And at the end, there's a number of different ways that you can get points through that, but whoever has built the most productive empire wins. And part of that is an attempt to build your wonder that you're dealt randomly at the beginning of the game.
How is that tracked? Is that just victory points?
It's all victory points, yeah.
Okay. And so you're saying that there's basically separate decks for each age that you go through, and everybody goes through deck 1, then everybody goes through deck 2, and civilization progresses thusly.
That's right. That's right. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but I think that you do discard like a small amount of cards from each age, so that it's slightly random, and then in age 3 you add some special cards called guild cards in that are big money makers.
Yeah.
So
you don't discard anything in age cards. 1 and 2. So it's each deck is depending on number of players, so you remove cards depending on player count. But no, it's always the same amount of cards, except for age 3. Right. There are so many guild cards, you don't put them all in the deck. Those are randomly discarded. and you put a certain amount into the deck and shuffle it in. So you don't know exactly which guild card you'll get.
How many ages
So
are there?
3, and it's so it's pretty much there's a slight bit of randomness in age 3, but the randomness comes from any amount of randomness that comes from the game is what cards you're going to get when you get handed the hand from your next door neighbor.
Yeah, I would say it's. I mean, it sounds like there's randomness if you're going to shuffle a deck of cards, right?
You shuffle a deck of cards. All the cards in ages 1 and 2 are the same, except that a player might choose something that you want, and they might actually do that strategically. They might actually take a card, looking at your empire. They might say, well, Greg really could use this card, so I'm going to use it instead, unless there's something better for him. Age 1 has really, really basic cards, things that just generate things that will be familiar to people, like in Catan. So it generates wood, or it generates ore or stone. Linen, I think, is one. Glass is another.
Is it just sort of like as you go through the decks, just sort of like a basic, Civ, Age of Empires, where you're working your way up the tech tree type thing?
There's not much tech tree going on. There's a little bit that we can get into later, but for the most part, it's just about Age 1 is about getting a foundation of resources that your civilization needs. Age 2 is about getting more advanced resources. And then Age 3 is about generating victory points by completing your wonder or completing guild cards. The nice thing about the game is that there are no tokens to keep track of. Basically, you're the cards that go in front of you, that will, on your turn, they all generate one of whatever they say. So you just look at what the cards are in front of you, and if you played a wood card in Age 1, that will generate wood every turn to purchase new cards with.
So is there even a board? Is it just decks?
It's mostly decks. The only board that exists is the board that represents the wonder that you're striving to accomplish, to build. And each wonder has 3 sections that need to be built. So they don't need to be built in each age. You can build them all in one age if you wanted to, or spread it out over the 3 ages. But every section that you build has a certain requirement as far as resources that you need to have available. And it also, when you build it, it does something. So it will give you something like victory points or some ability to manipulate the decks or something along those lines.
Okay. All right, good. Greg, anything you want to add to your thoughts on sort of that basic summary? That cover it?
Just the overview? No, that's sums it up, I think. Basically, it's a drafting game. You're building up a tableau in front of you. I guess we're gonna get the theme next.
Yeah, why don't we do that? So I guess it sounds like then the theme would purport to be that you are building a civilization. Greg, how do you feel like it does as far as theme goes?
0. There's no theme to me in this game at all. I would say out of the games that we reviewed so far, it has even less theme than Carcassonne to me.
Okay.
I see it as like there's symbols, and you're just playing symbols to match other symbols. It's barely a civ. It barely feels like you're building up a civilization to me.
That is true. If you have a really vivid imagination, like you are when you play cards, they do have names. So you would be playing things like the gardens, or the glassworks, or the brewery, things like that. So you could, if you wanted to, you could look at the cards in your tableau and be like, oh well, I've got a brewery, and my people are really happy with that and whatnot. But there's no theme to speak of.
Yeah, and the only reason I want to mention that is because I don't need theme in my game, but sometimes I hear this game recommended to people when people say, hey, I want a quick Civ game. I don't know why people recommend this game, because it doesn't feel like a Civ game to me. It's fine the way it is, but just FYI, if you're looking for a Civ game, this isn't what I would go to.
Because it doesn't feel like you're creating a civilization. I mean, what does it feel like you're doing then when you're playing?
It does not. It feels like you're... I wouldn't even say... I was about to say that it feels like you're building an engine, like it's an engine building type game, but I actually don't think that it really does that either. I think it's just it's just almost it's not, well, resource management maybe. I don't
Well,
know.
I mean,
It's
there's a slight engine buildy aspect to it. I mean,
it.
you can build more
I think
powerful
that's the
things.
closest. I think that's the
It's a
closest
tab.
thing.
It's you have a tableau. You have cards
Right.
that give you certain symbols. It's a card game at the end of the day. That's how I see it.
Mhm.
I mean, that board for the Wonder barely needs to exist. It's
Right.
just a
That's
card
true.
game, and the symbols are just suits. So it kind of
Mhm.
feels that, to me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that um, to feel like a civilization building game, you'd either need, you know, I'm just thinking that it seems like you'd want to have either the sensation of sort of, expanding outward from where you started, or the sensation of sort of building upon what's come before, either like you visually represented on a board that you're kind of taking over the land, or if it was an engine building game where now a new component unlocks something now that you're able to do in age 2 that you couldn't do in age 1. But you're saying it doesn't have any of those. I mean, it sounds like it doesn't have any of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think, and maybe this is because I'm so I'm so visual with regards to my games. I like art. I like the art. I like the components, things like that. That's what helps me get into a theme. If a civilization game, even if a really well-made civilization game, civ game, doesn't have a map
Mm-hmm.
showing where my civilization is in relation to other players and how it's been expanding and stuff like that, I can't. I have a real hard time imagining that it's a civilization game. Even games like, I know we try not to talk about games we haven't reviewed yet, but Through the Ages, that's a civ game.
Mm-hmm.
But I still don't feel like I'm building a civilization in that game because I don't have any representation of where my people are, where my cities are, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't need a map. I think Through the Ages is one of the best civilization games made. So
I do think it
uh,
is a civilization game. I just have
uh,
a hard time with the theme.
I think with Seven Wonders, like it makes nods toward what's required in Civilization. You have wars, but it's just matching symbols. Your resources in the land, but it's just symbols. It's just all so abstracted and so
Mm-hmm.
short. I just don't think it could be considered because you don't feel like you're going through many ages here. I don't feel like I'm
3 ages
further
isn't a
ahead
lot
in.
anyway, right?
It's not even like it feels like I'm now in the modern age in age 3. I don't even know, is there progression in timeline through the ages? I never pay attention, but it feels like I'm still, not that a civilization needs to go, or a civilization game needs to go through up to modern age.
Mm-hmm.
Antiquity never gets out of the antiquity era, and
Right.
that feels like a civilization game, but it's just not long enough. Period, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just way too abstracted. So that's just a heads up. It's civ themed, but that's about it, and the theme is barely there.
Okay. So, so then, Greg, let me ask you this then. So, as far as theme, so I think that kind of covers the theme and the way that it feels. So, going into the game as you're playing it, then let's talk about the system of the game. What are the various sort of pieces of the game system that are at work that you need to think about once you sit down and you kind of get into it and you start playing?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you have to choose the cards you want to play from your hand. And your choices, I think, boil down to, do I give me something like a resource that's going to potentially help me build something bigger in the future? Or do I use what I have now to build this card, which can give me some points now? And I think that's the tension in the game. You could just build only a couple resources in the first age and just focus on all those point buildings, right? But then in age 2, oh, I don't have enough resources to build these other buildings, right? So I think there's that constant tension between long-term goal victory points versus working on building up your tableau to be more efficient in later ages. To me, that's the main decision space in the game.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I also think that there's a couple of different strategies that people can experiment with in the game. They can try for a very prosperous civilization by playing a ton of resource cards, and then hope that they can generate a lot of points in age 3, in age 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can attempt to do something a little more fancy, like with a science angle. There are science cards And the science cards are probably the most complicated part of the game because they require there's a bit of collection going on. You need to collect sets of cards, and so having a tableau that lets you get a lot of cards and or generate more symbols from that set. That would be a different strategy than just trying to go for a ton of points at the end of the game. But I really think those are the two main decisions that people need to make when they play the game.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to, as is the case with most drafting games, you kind of have to find your lane, right? Because you have to see what is other people drafting. Are they going to take the cards that I need for the strategy I'm going for? If I see a ton of people taking science cards, well, that's probably not a lucrative strategy because science to work, I need a lot of science cards. Are my neighbors going for military cards? How heavily? Because if they're not, maybe I don't need to focus on it. So with drafting games, it's also finding out what's my niche going to be in this game. Where can I fit in that I'm confident that the cards I need are going to come my way. I think that's also part of the strategy, is just trying to figure out where is my lane in this game that's open to me. And that's the case with most drafting games, I think.
So with that in mind, let me ask you, you guys played, how many players did you play at?
4.
This week we played 4-player.
Okay. So, and it says anywhere from 2 to 7 players. So do you feel like this game promoted, we've talked a lot on some of the other ones about the degree to which you're interacting with the person across from you. Did it promote a lot of that because of what you're saying, Greg, that you have to be sort of more tuned in to what the other people are doing? Is there some mechanism by which the players interact with each other in the game? You mentioned battles, I guess, but or is everybody just sort of doing their own thing?
No, it's at most you're interacting with your neighbors. You kind of have to pay attention to the people across the table just to see what they're drafting, but the higher the player count, the less relevant that is, because those cards might not be coming back to you anyways. Mm-hmm. So, really, you only ever directly interact with your neighbors. You do have, they call it a war. You basically compare symbols with your neighbors at the end of each age and see who has higher military strength. And there's an exchange of victory points, basically, or maybe you lose one and they gain some if you lost. And the other one is you can buy resources from your neighbors. So you might give them some money to buy a resource that you don't have. That's it. But that only ever happens with your next door neighbors. So even at higher player counts, and I've played this, everything from 3 to 7, it never feels like larger than a 3-player game to me.
Okay. Interesting. Was that match with your feeling, Eric?
Yeah, the player interaction is almost non-existent. So it's kind of like it's a bit of a solitaire game. The only thing you need to pay attention to is, hey, is somebody else collecting a type of card that I am also trying to collect? So for instance, in the game that we played, no one went for science, and Greg saw that. So, and that just takes a glance because the iconography in this game is great. So when you look out, you just glance out at the board. If you see green in anybody else's a tableau, then they're going for science, or they have at least a few science cards. And so no one was going for that, so Greg decided to go the science route. And other than that, and the wars that happen at the end of every age, there is no meaningful player interaction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we'll kind of get into the as we're thinking about these mechanics and things, get into the good and the bad in a minute. But before that, I guess, so me having not heard of it, honestly, this all sounds pretty vanilla to me. It sounds very straightforward. I guess before we talk about what it does good or bad, is there anything that you guys feel that it does that's unique to Seven Wonders?
I don't think so. I think it does it. I think it does what it does very cleanly.
Mm-hmm.
Did we lose Greg?
Greg?
No.
Oh no, we did.
Well, he'll hop back on in a second. That means I get to talk, and Greg can't interrupt me.
Yeah,
Greg's a
finally.
loser. By the way, actually, he is. I won the game of Seven Wonders that we played.
Really? Well, that's probably why he exited. The shame.
No, but to answer your question, no, I don't think so. It does what it does cleanly, and it does it well. But I don't think it innovates really. And I know the designers of the game are gonna, not that they're ever gonna watch this, but they would hate it to hear that, because it's a great. Well, I think it's a great game. It doesn't do anything new, and I think that's fine. I think it's fine to have a game that just cleanly does something really well and doesn't try to innovate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of games that that work just fine by taking all of the unique ideas that have come before and really, really polishing them up. Is that what you think this is?
Yeah, I think it's a highly polished tableau style game. It's a really simple engine builder. I think that's basically what it is. I've got some quibbly bits with it, but for simplicity of gameplay, it's very clean.
Okay, cool.
Try to get Greg back here.
Yeah. He said his internet just glitched out. So.
Oh, I see. Well, Greg agrees with me about all the things I've been saying, so we can just continue.
Yeah. If there's one thing that you and Greg do a lot,
it's agree all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, especially when we're not talking to each other or have the ability to rebut anything.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, my internet just completely went kaput.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so Eric is saying that when it comes to new stuff, that no, he thinks that it doesn't really innovate. It just, maybe takes things that have come before and polishes them. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the first drafting game for sure. I think, as with a lot of these classic games we've been talking about, I think it popularized drafting. But yeah, I don't think there's anything here that's particularly innovative. It's just a very smooth playing version of what came before.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into it then. We'll start with you, Greg. What did it do well? What did it do right?
So this is easy for me because I think there's a very clear thing it does well, and that is, so the box says 2 to 7 players. I don't agree with the 2-player. I've never tried it, but it doesn't appeal to me. But 3 to 7 players, it works well at all of those player counts. And trying to find a game that works well at that wide of a range of player counts is difficult. I try to keep a rather small collection, and I like having a lot of games that work in a variety of situations because of that. And so when I have a game that works 3 to 7 players, that's pretty great. And the best part of it is it plays about 30 minutes, maybe up to 45 minutes at all of those player counts.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, it's simultaneous selection, right? You draft, you choose your card. Everyone's doing that at the same time. So there's never a point where it's basically not your turn. So the idea that I can pull out a game that plays 5, 6, 7 players, know that it's going to be done in a half hour to 45 minutes is pretty amazing to me. That just doesn't happen very often. And it's got just enough crunch in it that it's good. It's not like there's enough strategy here that it's a game I enjoy even at those high player counts. Usually when you get that high of a player count, it becomes like a party game.
Mm-hmm.
But this definitely feels like a strategy game. I almost call this like a filler plus. It's not quite that light, but it's not, I wouldn't wrap a whole evening around it. But yeah, if you got that many gamers over and they all want to play a game, Seven Wonders gets played a lot for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that kind of goes along with your feeling that if you only ever interact with the 2 people next to you, then it doesn't really matter how big the ring is beyond that point, right? It would probably have the same type of feel.
Yeah, and I think some of the expansions even get it up to 8 players. And I can't imagine it's going to be as long as your slowest player.
Right.
That's about it. So.
Okay, cool. Eric, what do you think? What did it do right?
Yeah, I agree with what Greg said. I've been actually trying to think about what makes this game so popular.
Right, was going to be another question I had.
Yeah, it really is a very, very popular game. And look, when you think about it, it hasn't innovated anything new. It's extremely light and simple. There's very little player interaction. But strangely, it's just fun. It's a fun game. Like, I always enjoy Seven Wonders, even though it's so simple and a bit of solitaire, you know. I can't really put my finger on it. A part of it is the speed of play. You're always engaged with the game. That is part of it. I think it's a pretty game, and I think it's fun. I think maybe the reason why it's so fun is because while I think I would disagree with Greg that I don't think it has nearly as much crunch, or I think it's an extremely simple game. I don't really actually think there's a ton of strategy in this game, honestly. When it came to my turn, I just age 1 and age 2. If I had a brown or a gray card, the cards that allow you to have resources, I put it down. That was my decision, or that was how I made decisions. There wasn't even a decision. And then when I got to age 3, I just generated as many points as possible through public cards and things like that.
I don't think it's a very crunchy game. I mean,
no, I know.
I'm just saying I think it's crunchier than a lot of games that play 6-7 player, which are typically
well, that
games.
might be true. Yeah, you might be true. Yeah, that's actually a good
between
point.
This and Telestrations, this has more crunch, right?
This has more strategy than Telestrations. Yes, you're right.
That was my basic
and it's
point.
true that, like, okay, well, then I agree with you on that. And I think that the fun for me comes from not decisions that I'm making on my turn, but the fun comes from watching kind of the points accumulate, especially in age 3. Like, being able to play every turn on age 3, being able to play a 7-point card, that because by that time you have so many resources in your kingdom, in your empire. Like, that's a good feeling. I don't know. There's something kind of like fulfilling about that afterwards.
So, so that's interesting because you guys did not mention that before. I guess maybe like a little more detail about how that simultaneous play works then, because that does sound interesting. How does it prevent it from becoming chaotic and unmanageable?
Because you're only ever really interacting with people.
What's that? Say that again.
You're not really interacting with other people, so there's no need for turn order structure. You basically, the whole game, you're building up your tableau. You have your civilization you're worried about. You're putting your card to your civilization, and no other player needs to worry about what you just played. Mm-hmm. So there's no need for a turn order.
And you're not like all fighting over the same deck or something like that at the same time?
No, it's one deck. Everyone gets 7 cards in that one deck. You draw a card. You pass the leftover cards to the left. You put them face down. You wait for everyone to choose their card. Mm-hmm. You put the card you choose face down, and then you all flip it over at the same time.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Very good. Well, yeah, and that would help with engagement, which, like I've said before, a lot of times with these solitaire-esque type games, I get very detached from the game if I've made my decision and then I have to sit around for 15, 20 minutes while the 5 or 6 other people, that's lame. So yeah, that would definitely be a point in its favor. So let's go the other way. Greg, what did you do wrong?
At the end of the day, it's just not interactive enough for me. I think that's what it boils down to. There's some interaction. Like I said, you have to figure out what your lane is. There's some military battles, but you could honestly completely ignore military, and the game doesn't punish you too heavily for that. You only ever take a -1 for each battle you've lost, whereas the person winning the battles gets higher and higher points for that. So there's some interaction, but for the most part, it's not at all. It's very indirect, and I like interactive games. The second one, I kind of agree with what Eric was talking about. Especially towards the end of the game, the decisions can become automatic. Once you've decided this is what I'm going for, this is what my strategy is going to be, you get a hand of cards and you go, okay, well, this one I have to pay my neighbor for, this one does nothing for me. this one's for free. I can just build it, and it gives me a ton of points. Well, I guess I'm building this card.
Right.
There's no real. There's a certain point in the game where I feel like there's no real. Not always are there choices being made, and that can be a very relaxing game. But I don't look for relaxing games.
That's a great way to put. That's a great way to put it. I think Seven Wonders is fun in a relaxing way. I think it's a very chill game.
So
Maybe
probably part
like
of what makes it so popular again.
Yeah.
Like it's a very easy kind of social party game that isn't going to stress anybody out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
The question of the popularity, I think, it won the Kennerspiel, so that's a big award. Those games always kind of take off. But also, I do think it's just a smooth playing, easy game to learn. It just feels, it's got a nice cadence to it. I think really the idea that it's always your turn, there's something to that. Like
definitely.
You're always engaged. I mean, that's a big deal, I think. And this is one of the first games to popularize that, to make it big. And I think that just captured people's imaginations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. All right, Eric, what do you think? What did you do bad?
I don't think it did anything bad. I just don't think it did anything great. I think that's why it's so popular. It's because it's very palatable. It's very accessible, and the reason for that is because it doesn't have any glaring flaws, in my opinion. It's just it doesn't really do anything that makes you just like stand up and wow, that was amazing, or want to flip the table. It's just kind of medium level, and because it can play so many players, it's very popular for that reason. If there's one thing that's kind of a quibble of mine, it's the military and how the military stuff just doesn't. Maybe I don't want to fight at the end of every age. I know it's a very minor point, but it's like at the end of every age, you're going to fight your neighbors to the left and to the right. That's it. So the only thing it's all that does is it makes you have to pay attention to that. Does my neighbor to my left have any military cards? Does the neighbor to my right have any military cards? You're very rarely going to have a complete strategy about winning the game based on you getting a ton of military cards. It just doesn't generate enough points to do that. So that's not really one of the lanes that you can choose. It might be a supplement, but you can't totally win the game with just military fighting battles.
I don't think there's any strategy in the game that you can 100% focus on, except maybe science, if no one else is doing science. But I do think military is a valid supplement, depending on what your neighbors are doing. And I like the military, actually, because a lot of civilization, like through the ages, for example, you don't fight a lot of wars, but it feels like a big arms race if you're playing against people who know what they're doing. And Seven Wonders kind of has that similar feeling too. I mean, again, it's not a Civ game. It doesn't really. You're collecting symbols, but it does kind of have that feel that you're like an arms race. So if I put down some military symbols and my neighbor starts putting some down, you have to decide: do I want to invest all this into the military, or do I just bail out now and let my neighbor take it? Because I like that interaction. At least that's one aspect of interaction.
I just don't like the fact that all it is an arms race.
Sure, but
there is no, you don't feel like if they're gonna have. I understand, and this is why I say it's a very, very small point. But I would rather have the battle feel like, or the military cards feel like I am winning something. I am taking an action, kind of a thing, as opposed to just.
Would you like it better if you won the battle, you like stole a resource card from them or something like that?
Yeah, that's just a small thing like that might actually be more, just because then you could at least have you could go aggro as opposed to all it is just a Cold War with your neighbors. I don't know, but it's a small point. That is not the focus of the game at all. So
you don't find it to be a feature that that stimulates or catalyzes interaction, since you're having to pay attention to what the other people are doing in that regard?
That's the only thing that military does that adds to the game, is it makes you pay a small amount of attention to your neighbors. So in that sense, it's good, but since you can't, it might be a good supplement, like Greg says, to winning the game. But since you can't completely win the game based on military, you are never you're never motivated to get a big strong army, because it's never about you conquering other your other nations, the other nations around you. It's just about it almost feels like it's always about defense.
So
now a small point is that they actually fixed that in a later version of the game called Seven Wonders Duel, which we don't need to get into right now, but I think Seven Wonders Duel, that one of the win conditions is a military win condition, and that I think fixed it in my opinion.
Okay.
I don't know. I think I disagree that you can't just choose military as an offensive option, because I mean, that's, if you win both of your battles every time, that's 18 points.
Sure.
That's a lot of points. And then there's guild cards that also give you points for defeating your, like, I think you could get a point for every defeat token they have. I think military, like I said, I don't think there's any strategy that you can just go 100% on. I don't think military is an exception there. But I think you can, if those are the cards that are coming your way, focus on military. And if your opponents just give up on it, I think you can get a good chunk of points there without a lot of effort.
If you were to do that, you would give if you're playing a 4-player game, you would have given the game to the player who's not engaged in any wars. I think fighting wars, it's basically just, it slows. It's not the most efficient way to make points. So if you're focused on making points through military, you might king make a little bit, because now you're probably not going to win, although you might be second place, but your neighbors aren't going to win, and you just gave the game to the guy across the table from you.
No,
because,
I
like you said,
disagree.
18. But what was our score in the end? It was 50 and like 47, something like that.
Yeah, it was close, but I feel like all of the routes are, all the avenues, whether you go with the blue cards, the green cards, or the red cards, I think they're all balanced in a way that as long as you're not spending too many resources on them, and you know, like, this is what's open to me, I can win these 18 points with minimal effort, that's a good chunk of points. I'm just saying that.
Here's why you're wrong, Greg. So if you think about if you're thinking about winning the game and you want to win the game, there's only one option that is not that has the lowest amount of chance involved, because if you're going the science route, if one of the other players starts collecting science cards, then there's fewer. Okay, here's the point. There's fewer science cards in the deck than there are just regular resource cards. So you've got the option to wait around for those science cards to show up and hope that you're the one that gets the right cards as opposed to your opponents. The other way you could go is military. But with military, you're counting on getting those 18 points by winning all 6 battles the entire game, and that's probably not going to happen, because your neighbors are also going to be getting military cards too. So you can't control. I'm talking about aspects of the game you can control. You can't control whether you're going to get those science cards all the time. You can't control whether you're going to win all your battles. The one thing that has a better chance of control is, can I get a ton of resources? Because there's way more resource cards in the decks than there are science cards or military cards. And so just get a ton of resources and then buy every card that shows up in your hand in age 3. And I think that's the safer way, just based on the percentage of those types of cards in the decks.
Okay, well then let me ask you this. Would you say, because of that, you should not go military at all?
I think you need a small military.
Okay. So if you buy 2 military cards,
yeah,
you're my neighbor, you buy 2 of your military cards, I buy 3 for nothing, and now I win 18 points.
Say again.
Right? So you're saying you don't want to go heavy on military. You buy 1 or 2 shields. I buy 3, so I spent like 1 more card than you did, or maybe I bought it in the second age that comes with 2 shields. Now I'm getting 18 points, and I don't have to do anything because you're my neighbor.
I might actually change what I said there and say that you shouldn't go military. It might be beneficial to, if possible, not go military at all, because I'll only be getting -3 points for the entire game. Let's say you do get you win all 6 battles and you do get your 18 points. I don't think 18 points is that big of a deal when it's compared to all the there's a high percentage of cards in age 3 that are 7 points. One shot, 7 points. Well, 2 of those, and I've almost caught up with your 18 points.
Okay, but if you build no military, then I build 1 shield, which I can build really easily because it's age 1. I probably have the resource. That's for you as my neighbor, that's 9 points I'm getting plus 3 points I'm taking from you. That's a 12-point swing for 1 card that costs me barely nothing.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. And
I think if you say that I'm not going to go military at all, well, I want you as my neighbor because that's 12-point swing for barely nothing. Those 8-point cards you're talking about requires you to put down a lot of resources before you get there. You have to have the resources available, but
and you're going to have them.
Shield is easy.
You're definitely going to have them because there's more brown and gray cards in the deck than anything else. So you're going to have those resources, and you're going to be able to get guild cards. You're going to be some of the guild cards are like, play. At the end of the game, I could afford everything that I saw, like all the guild cards, everything, and the guild cards are like 12 points because you've got 12 brown cards in your hand. For one card.
In age 3.
In age 3.
But I'm buying an age 1 military card, 1 shield, which are not worth 8 points at that point. This 1 card is now worth a 12-point swing for me from age 1.
I mean, that's an extreme example. I understand what you're saying. 1 card worth 18 points. That's valid. But you're also going to be losing.
The group think, though. That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. That's part of the group think. If you say military is not worth it, I'm out. Then I'm like, oh, sweet. Then I'll get this military card, and I'm winning a ton of points from him.
I just don't think if with your one. But the other thing is you have to remember your other neighbor. Your other neighbor is going to be beating you because you've only got 1 card. Now that one, so basically you have to have that amount. Probably, he's going to have. Let's say he has 2 shields. Now you're only making 9 points because you're only beating me. That's
why I'm saying why I think military is more interesting than you're making it out to be. Because I say that military has that interesting decision about how hard do I push this? How much points are these worth it? If I can, for 1 shield, win all of my battles, then clearly that's worth it. That's obviously worth me buying that card. Okay, is it worth me buying 2 military cards? Yeah, probably. Is it worth 3? Is it worth 4? And I find that dynamic to be one of the most interesting part of the games is how far am I willing to push military? At what point should I bail on this option? And I think it's a legitimate strategy, especially if you see the 4th player over there going heavy on military. Then okay, well, he's going heavy on military. That means there's less military cards in the deck. If I can get an early lead in it, maybe that keeps me ahead. I just find there's more decisions there than maybe I feel you're alluding to. I think
maybe I'd be curious to play a game where we played out that experiment.
And at the same time, you say it doesn't feel like you're running an empire with all these decisions about how much military spending to have.
I'm using the verbs and nouns the game has given me to work with, but at the end of the day, we're talking about comparing number of symbols.
Yeah, I understand. That's very interesting. So, okay. Well, let's go now to final thoughts. Final ranking for this game. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Would you play it again? Would you recommend it? Start with Greg.
Yeah, I own it, and I would recommend it for the most part because it fills that very specific slot of it plays a high player count. There's some strategy to it, not a lot. There's some, and it plays quickly. Like 30 to 45 minutes. So I would clarify everything like this though. If this were like a standard 4-player game, and it was turn-based, like I took my turn. And then I had to wait for 3 more players to take their turn. That took my turn. This would be like a 5 to me. Mm-hmm. Like I don't think I would ever want to play it. It would be very mediocre. But the fact that it plays simultaneously and you're always on turn and it plays such a high player count,
ratchets it up.
It ratchets it up enough that I'm willing to own it. It's such a big deal to me that it plays large groups quickly.
Yeah. So
what's
your number?
But the actual, so maybe I give it a 7 at the end of the day. I might want to get off this grading system.
You might need to start using decimal points.
I actually like the fact that you're the only one of us that's numbering that, and I like it.
I feel like all of these early classic games are going to be around a 6 or 7 range, anyways. Sure. That's just the way they are. But yeah, just the fact that you're always on turn probably gets it up to a 7. For me, that's where I stand. It's just not enough strategy there for me. I guess, at the end of the day. It's too light, not enough interaction. I like my games to be tense, cutthroat, and this is not that at all.
Right. Well, for all that, for you to still own it, in spite of that, it certainly does recommend the other features of it, then, I guess I would say. Eric, what about you?
Don't really have anything to add. I agree with Greg 100% on that. If it wasn't for those factors in the game, I would never want to play it. But honestly, the speed of the game and the fact that it can play so many people, and it's short, and it's pretty, and it does give me at least a sense of accomplishment at the end, even though I do. It's a fake. It's a faux sense of accomplishment, because really the strategy is so low. I'm kind of on autopilot the whole time. But it is nice to see the points flowing in at the end of the game. I do think it's fun. It's a fun game, so I would recommend it. But there are other things out there that I own that are more interesting to me that do a similar thing.
Okay, very good. Well, like we've talked about, we have our shelf that fits 10 games. We're still working our way up to the first 10, so this will be game number 4, 7 Wonders, that will get placed on our shelf. Once we get above 10 games, we'll see which games progressively continue to make the cut and which get booted. But that is our take on 7 Wonders. What are we going to talk about next time, guys? What is next on the list?
Oh, I didn't even look. What are we doing?
I believe it's Dominion, if Eric wants to do that one. Have you played that before? Okay.
I have.
Well, I guess Dominion then.
Dominion. Okay. Yeah. All right. Very good. So we look forward to that. And until then, this has been a piece of the action.
Cortazine sounds like the one that I recall.
Cortazine. I was going to say Cortazine sounds like.
It almost sounds like a real drug.
Yeah, but Cortazine, isn't that the stuff they always ask for in like TNG? They're always like 5 cc's of Cortazine.
Yeah, maybe, but I think he got too much of it. I think because I think he was going on to like
6 cc's.
Yeah, he was going to go on to like. Wasn't he going to like give it to that crew member because that crew member was freaking out or something, and he accidentally stabbed himself with it and got too much. So I think it was Cortazine.
Cortazine. It's Cordrazine, just to be clear. If that extra syllable throws it off.
Okay. Whoa, I changed my mind then. Whoa, I changed my mind.
Yeah, I know. So you guys are going with Cordrazine? I'm actually going to say D. I think it's going to be Stokeline.
That was my second choice.
Just to be contrary, but I'll plug in B, Cordrazine. Oh, that was correct. Cordrazine is the correct answer. Man, they're playing with fire there on Next Generation then. You know how many times they give Cordrazine? I bet after McCoy's accident, I bet they put like a safety on those hypodermics or whatever they call it.
Well, I mean, yeah, in the future when you go to like Space Walgreens, they don't let you just buy all the Cordrazine. It's kind of like buying like Sudafed D now.
Right.
You know,
it's behind one of the plexiglass doors. You got to ask the guy to come and unlock it for you.
Yeah.
It's transparent aluminum doors. Okay.
Right. All right.